Have you ever wondered why some gardeners can place a fresh cutting into a simple glass of water, and within days strong white roots begin to appear, while your own cutting slowly turns soft, brown, and lifeless? You choose a piece from a plant you truly love, set it carefully in clean water by the window, and wait with real hope. But instead of healthy new roots, the stem becomes slimy, the water turns cloudy, and that unpleasant smell tells you something has gone wrong. But what if the problem is not that you lack a green thumb? Today, we are going to change the way you think about plant propagation. I'll share a simple, often overlooked natural ingredient you can add to your water to help cuttings stay cleaner, stronger, and far more ready to root. You do not always need to rely on expensive chemical rooting powders. Nature already gives us powerful tools when we understand how to use them properly. Stay with me until the end because we will walk through 8 practical discoveries that can make your propagation station healthier. And I'll also clear up one popular houseplant myth that may be quietly causing more confusion than success. Let's begin and give your cuttings a much better chance to grow. Before we talk about what helps a cutting root, we need to understand what happens the moment we take that cutting. To us, it may look like a simple snip, but to the plant, it is a serious injury. A stem that was once connected to the mother plant is suddenly separated from its water, minerals, sugars, and natural support system. Its vascular connection is cut off. Its defenses are weakened, and that fresh wound becomes extremely vulnerable. Many gardeners believe that clean tap water alone should be enough to create new roots. Sometimes it works, but very often plain water does not provide the conditions a stressed cutting needs. Tap water may lack useful support, and in some areas it can contain chloramines that are harsh on tender, freshly cut cells. At the same time, fungal spores and rot-causing bacteria are always nearby waiting for a chance to enter the open tissue. That cut end is not just a stem anymore, it is an exposed doorway. If the cutting does not have enough strength to protect itself, rot takes over. Think of it like this. If you had a fresh wound and kept it in warm, still water for several days, infection would be a real risk. Stagnant water loses oxygen, quickly creating an environment where anaerobic activity can begin. That process may produce compounds that damage delicate plant tissue and encourage bacteria to multiply. So, the goal is not just to place a cutting in water. The goal is to turn that water into a cleaner, more protective, more supportive environment. We have to give the cutting a real chance to fight back. This is where our first simple ingredient comes in. It is something many people already have in the kitchen: raw multiflora honey. Yes, honey. And I know some gardeners immediately become skeptical because they hear sugar and think, won't that feed bacteria? But raw honey is not the same as plain sugar water. Good raw honey is a concentrated natural substance shaped by bees, and it contains properties that can help protect a fresh cutting when used correctly. When you briefly dip the cut end of a fresh stem into a small amount of honey before placing it in water, the honey coats that injured area like a thin protective layer. Its real value is in the way it helps discourage bacteria and fungi around the wound. Honey naturally has very low moisture, often around 17%, and that creates strong osmotic pressure. In simple terms, it makes life difficult for many microbes by pulling moisture away from them. There is another useful detail. When honey is diluted, the enzyme glucose oxidase can slowly produce small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, which adds another layer of protection against fungal spores and unwanted microbes. This does not mean honey is magic, but it can help keep the vulnerable cut end cleaner during those first important days. At the same time, forming new adventitious roots takes energy. The simple sugars in honey, mainly fructose and glucose, may give the stressed cutting a small, easily available energy source, while it begins the hard work of building new cells. With plants that are slower or more sensitive, like ficus or rubber tree cuttings, this small protective step can make the difference between a clean callus forming and a stem collapsing into rot. In the right conditions, you may begin to notice pale callus tissue and early root activity in about 10 to 14 days. But honey is not the only natural helper worth knowing. If you have an aloe vera plant growing on a windowsill, you may already have one of the most useful propagation aids sitting right in front of you. Aloe vera is famous for soothing human skin, but that clear gel inside its thick leaves can also be helpful for plant cuttings. The transparent gel contains natural compounds, including amino acids and salicylic acid. In plants, salicylic acid works like a signal. It helps activate defense responses and encourages the cutting to respond to stress instead of simply weakening. The message to the plant is simple: protect the wound, stay alive, and begin building new roots. To use aloe vera, cut a small piece about 2 in long from a lower leaf of the plant. Open it carefully and scrape out only the clear gel with a small spoon. Try to avoid the yellowish sap close to the skin, because that part can be irritating and is not what we want for delicate cuttings. Blend or stir the clear gel with a little lukewarm water until the mixture becomes slightly cloudy. Then place your cuttings into that liquid. This creates a gentle, supportive environment around the cut stem. The gel helps coat the wound, keeps the tissue from drying too quickly, and supplies natural compounds while the cutting begins to adjust. On stubborn plants, this method can sometimes help small root tips appear sooner and with less trouble. It is one of those simple, old garden tricks that makes sense once you understand what the plant is going through. Now, let's move beyond the kitchen and windowsill and step into one of the oldest plant propagation secrets gardeners have used for generations: willow water. If there is a willow tree near you, whether it is a weeping willow, a corkscrew willow, or another fast-growing willow, you may have one of nature's strongest rooting supports within reach. Willows are known for their ability to root quickly and grow with remarkable energy. That vigor is linked to natural plant compounds found in their young branches, including indole-3-butyric acid, often called IBA, and salicylic acid, or SA. IBA is one of the same rooting hormones used in many commercial rooting products. Willow branches contain enough natural rooting potential that a fresh willow cutting pushed into moist soil will often produce roots with very little encouragement. The useful part is that we can draw of that support into water. Collect a few young green willow stems, especially the fresh, flexible tips from the current season's growth. Cut them into small pieces, about 1 in long, so more surface area touches the water. Some traditional recipes recommend pouring boiling water over the willow pieces, but many experienced growers prefer a cooler method because very high heat may weaken some delicate plant compounds. For a gentler and more practical approach, crush the pieces lightly and steep them in cool, unchlorinated water for 48 to 72 hours. After that, strain the liquid. What you have is a simple willow water solution that can be used for fresh houseplant cuttings. Place the newly cut stems into this water during the first couple of days, when the wound is most active, and the cutting is deciding whether to rot, stall, or begin forming roots. During this early window, the cutting can absorb supportive compounds from the water, helping push it toward root formation with a cleaner, stronger start. But what if you live in an apartment and you do not have a willow tree nearby? That does not mean you are out of options. Sometimes, one of the simplest substitutes is already sitting in the medicine cabinet. For thousands of years, people used willow bark to help with pain and fever. Later, In the 1800s, scientists identified the active compound behind that traditional use, and by 1897, it had been refined into acetylsalicylic acid, the active ingredient found in common aspirin. In a way, a small white tablet carries a piece of that old willow wisdom. For plant cuttings, the method is simple. Dissolve one standard 325 ml uncoated aspirin tablet into a gallon of water. Then use that water to soak your cuttings. The salicylic acid can help activate a plant response known as systemic acquired resistance, or SAR. I like to explain it as a kind of early warning system for the plant. It does not replace good sanitation or proper care, but it can encourage the cutting to switch on its own defenses before fungi and bacteria gain the upper hand. When a cutting is stressed, that defensive signal matters. It helps the plant stay alert, protect the wounded tissue, and focus on survival long enough to begin forming roots. In a 2019 study on mung beans, seeds, and cuttings treated with salicylic acid, produced roots more than twice as long as the untreated control group. That is why aspirin can be such an interesting household tool for propagation. It uses a modern form of an ancient plant defense signal to help cuttings handle stress more effectively. Even when you provide useful compounds and a little extra support, there is one invisible factor that often decides whether a cutting lives or rots: oxygen. Roots need to breathe. New root tips are living tissue, and they require oxygen to produce energy. When a jar of water sits too long on a warm windowsill, dissolved oxygen slowly drops. The water becomes stale. The delicate tissue struggles, and anaerobic bacteria begin to take advantage of that weak environment. This is where 3% hydrogen peroxide can become useful. Hydrogen peroxide is basically water with one extra unstable oxygen atom. When added carefully to propagation water, it breaks down and briefly releases reactive oxygen. That reaction can help reduce some harmful microbes in the water, especially the types that thrive in low oxygen conditions. At the same time, the breakdown of hydrogen peroxide adds oxygen back into the water. That extra oxygen supports aerobic respiration, the process your cutting needs to generate energy for cell division and new root growth. But this is one place where more is not better. Too much hydrogen peroxide can damage tender stem tissue and burn the very cutting you are trying to save. A safe, careful approach is to add about 2 drops of 3% hydrogen peroxide per 100 milliliters of water, then replace the water every 48 hours. Used lightly, it can help refresh the propagation jar, reduce stagnation, and give your cuttings a cleaner, more oxygen-rich environment. Think of it as giving tired water a breath of life. Now, let's talk about one popular houseplant rumor that has spread everywhere online. You may have heard that if you place a golden pothos cutting in the same jar with a stubborn cutting, the stubborn plant will suddenly root faster. The common claim is that pothos grows so quickly because it releases rooting hormones into the water, and other plants absorb those hormones. As someone who has spent years teaching plant care and watching what actually happens in propagation jars, I have to be honest. The idea that pothos releases enough rooting hormone into the water to force another plant to root is not a reliable explanation. A pothos cutting does produce its own auxins, but those hormones mainly work inside the plant tissue. Any tiny amount that might leak into the surrounding water would be extremely small. Once diluted in a jar, that amount is unlikely to be strong enough to meaningfully stimulate another cutting. On top of that, many auxins are sensitive to light, and in a bright room, they can break down rather quickly. So, why do some people swear the trick works? The better explanation is not hormone sharing. It is oxygen and water movement. Golden pothos is a vigorous plant. As it grows and develops roots, it uses water, transpires, and creates subtle movement inside the jar. That small movement can help break up the stagnant layer of water around other cuttings. Better water movement can improve gas exchange and help keep more oxygen available near the stem. And for rooting, oxygenated water is far more important than a microscopic amount of leaked hormone. So, you do not need to sacrifice pothos cuttings as magical hormone donors. If you want better results, focus on what really matters: clean water, fresh oxygen, regular water changes, and a jar that does not sit stagnant for days. Now, let's say everything has gone well. You used a little honey or maybe willow water. The room stayed warm, somewhere around 72 to 79 degrees F, and now your cutting has beautiful white roots hanging from the stem. At this point, many beginners feel like the job is finished, but not quite. The final challenge is often the hardest part: moving that cutting from water into real soil. This is where many successful water propagations suddenly fail. If you take a cutting straight out of water and push it into dry, compact potting mix, it can suffer serious transplant shock. Water roots are adapted to life in a jar. They are usually thin, delicate, and built for constant moisture. They do not yet have the stronger outer layers and dense root hairs needed to pull water efficiently from soil particles. In a heavy or dry mix, those fragile roots can collapse, dry out, or be crushed by the substrate. One way to ease that shock is the gradual muddy water method. Instead of moving the cutting all at once, add a small spoonful of fine potting soil into the glass of water each day. Over about a week, the clean water slowly becomes a soft, muddy mixture. This allows the roots to adjust little by little to the texture, minerals, and feel of soil before they are fully planted. When it is time to pot the cutting, use a light, airy mix. A blend containing materials like perlite, vermiculite, and peat moss can help keep moisture available without suffocating the roots. Then use one more simple trick: a mini greenhouse. The young root system is not strong enough yet to supply all the water the leaves need in the dry air of a normal room. Place a clear plastic bag over the pot and plant. Puff a little air inside so the plastic does not press against the leaves, and close it loosely near the base. This traps humidity around the plant and reduces stress. Open it briefly once a day to let in fresh air. After a week or two, the plant can begin adjusting to normal room conditions. By then, the roots should be more anchored, the leaves should be less stressed, and your new plant will have a much better chance of growing strong. At first, all of this may sound like a lot to remember. But, at the heart of it, propagation is really about understanding nature and working with it instead of fighting against it. Plants have an ancient drive to survive. Given the right conditions, even a small cutting can become a whole new plant. Our job as gardeners is to remove the obstacles and give that cutting the support it needs at the right time. We do not always need to reach first for artificial chemicals or complicated products. Sometimes the answer is as simple as the protective sweetness of raw honey, the soothing gel of aloe vera, or the old rooting wisdom hidden in young willow branches. When these natural tools are combined with good technique, a clean 45-degree cut just below a leaf node, warm room temperatures, fresh oxygenated water, and careful handling, rot becomes far less likely. Instead of guessing and hoping, you begin to understand what the cutting needs and why it responds. That is when propagation starts to feel less like luck and more like skill. A small branch, handled with knowledge and patience, can become a thriving plant. And to me, that is one of the most rewarding miracles in gardening. If these methods have changed the way you look at the plants in your home, please subscribe to our channel. We are uncovering the practical lessons nature has been teaching all along, using old wisdom and careful observation to grow a greener present. Let's plant the future together. If you found this helpful, please leave a like on the video. The next treasure of garden wisdom will be revealed soon. Until next time, keep your hands in the dirt and your heart in the garden.